on the counter argument. And what I really wanted you to look at was the 4 to 5 parts to writing the counter argument. That's what we're going to be going over today. And also looking at this handout and sample of your main point number 2. So these are going to be the important things that you take a look at and note. Make sure that you understand the main point number 2 rough draft is due here. Remember that these are not graded per se. These are there for you to turn in if you would like feedback and for you to stay on track. But otherwise, the grades for this do not count towards your final grade. So don't feel stressed and pressured if for some reason, oh my goodness, you can't get it done by Sunday. So what I want you to do is cruise on in. We'll look here at the 4 to 5 parts of writing the counter argument. And when you come down here to the 4 to 5 steps to ensure you write this main point correctly, there's going to be about 4 to 5 steps. And that's what I'm going to be going over, are these 4 to 5 steps for each of us to work on today. So I'm going to go over that, and then I'll give you a little bit of some information and details about each of them as we go forward. So for you all, and for each of you that will be building into this main point, remember you are going to have first a transition, and that transition will say something like, now let's look at the reasons that some may not support my policy, right? Whatever that policy is. Anybody want to give me theirs and I can do theirs for you? Okay.
Oh, excuse me, Professor, you could do mine.
Sure. Okay, now let's look at some of the reasons some may not watch Sing 2, right? This is Andre's is to watch Sing 2. So we use our transition, and then we'll go ahead and use our Roman numeral number 2 to let you know how many subpoints we're going to have. There are 2 reasons I will address. Okay. So step 1, you are going to find the reasons that oppose your opinion. Those are your A's, your B's, and your C's already, if that's like a friendly reminder. So Andre, for you, what was your first A?
Give me to pull it up real quick. I think I had. Sorry, wait, I think I'm looking. Oh, is this?
We had children's cartoon, and then I think we had that musical, and then.
Okay. Give me 1 second real quick.
Sure.
That's a different page than what I had. Okay, so what I had is, let's see, the first reason is that it may seem like it's just made for kids.
Yep, because it's, it is children's
It's made,
cartoon. Yep.
it did like the minion.
For kids. Absolutely. So is everybody this, in fact, a reason why somebody wouldn't see it? Absolutely. So this A is a valid logical claim. We're going to lay out the reasoning that other people give for not engaging. And one of the reasons is it's because it's a cartoon. It's made for kids, right? This isn't going to appeal to me. Now, the second step that you are going to do in this argument is you are going to ask yourself a question. Does that claim need to be explained? Or is it common knowledge? So for example, does the audience understand and logically know that people wouldn't watch that because it was a cartoon? Or do you think I need evidence to prove that people don't watch Sing 2 because it's a cartoon? I'm going to answer this for you. It does not need any explanation. So let me say this. I had a student one time who was going to the first reason, which they said they were doing a drinking and driving speech. And they said the first reason that some still drink and drive is because it is fun. Natalie, are you there?
Yes.
Does it seem like, I don't know, have you ever heard of that before? People drink and drive because they think it's fun?
Teenagers.
Okay, I've never heard of that in my whole life. In my entire life, I'd never heard that. I was like, there is no way in the world that people are saying something like it's fun and that's why I'm going to do it. It's like a video game. So if you've already heard that, Natalie, then you are like, oh yeah, of course, like people do something like that. But for the average person, like I've never heard this in my life. I don't even know how this kind of devious behavior or thought process would work. And so in this case, that individual needed to explain. And that person, in fact, did do their research on drinking and driving. And come to find out, a survey was done of specific college students reporting on why they were drinking and driving. And a good percentage that came from this study, like 32% or something, said because it's fun. And I was like, that can't be a logical thought in the world. But they did, in fact, need to show that that was something that people were thinking, that people were opposing. Most of the time, we have heard arguments, or logically in our own mind, we can say, all right, we can see how people could disagree because of that. So most of the time, you only need to give the claim, and then you can skip this step 2. So does that make sense to everybody, that you'll first make this first claim? And I don't think this needs to be explained, Andre. We know that once people reach a certain age, they don't think it has anything, good to give to them. So
That makes sense.
yeah, something like that. If you feel like you do want to clarify something here, that is absolutely fine. And you are welcome to explain it, but you don't have to prove it, if that makes sense. So if you wanted to mention that most adults look at children's cartoons, like in general, a general idea as entertainment at a lower level, that some of these aren't that there's going to be a lower level of thinking or something. So what are they really going to get out of it? It's not meant for them. It's immature. Who knows, if you wanted to put something in there, you could. But then we come to an important part of our argument, because what we don't want to do is let that claim sit there. One of the reasons why people don't watch Sing 2 is because they believe it's a kid's movie. Lots of adults don't like kids' movies, so they don't watch Sing 2. Now I'll move on. No, because then people are like, oh, all right, well, it's a kids' movie. I'm not going to watch that. Your job here is to tell them why this claim is not correct. The point is, you already know, Andre, you have your conclusion, or you have your argument. Why or what about this is not like a cartoon? That's what you want to start saying. What about this is in fact made for both adults and kids? What about this content builds beyond the maturity of something that we would additionally or usually establish, right? And so what we work on doing here is addressing our opposition. And the way I like to say it is really starting to show them how they are not correct in their ways. So where I'm going to go from here, I'm going to show you the handout. Oh, wait, hold on 1 second here. So if you haven't seen yet, you have an entire example that I have made for you. You can walk yourself through these steps and write this on your own. I've given you a general purpose proposition and thesis statement here. Then what I've done is I have written you, for example, find a reason that opposes your opinion and state it as an opposing reason. That is in purple. Begin with a transition word in yellow and whose opinion it is. So, for example, the first reason, transition, right? That an open campus policy doesn't exist is that school administrators, that's whose opinion it is. What's the opposing reason? Think it would be a temptation for students to cut classes and act irresponsibly. So what I've done is pretty much laid out exactly how you would write these sentences and where you would start to place your pieces of evidence or argumentation. So remember what I was saying is that if you aren't going to give your explanation and there isn't a need to provide evidence, then you go into creating your concession and refutation. And so what does that mean? So we want to create a concession below using a phrase that allows our audience to know that there is something that we agree with. Why I like to talk about this is because it builds on our ethical and respect, our ethical responsibility and our respect for the integrity of public speaking and being free in public speech. So the idea of being able to engage in civic debate for the purpose of what it was done for, to clash arguments and discover truth. At this time, you are going to learn how to clash arguments so that you can show your audience why those people are not right, and in fact, you are. But one of the main things that we can do is, in fact, first, give a small concession phrase to our audience. What is one thing that we can maybe agree or establish agreement upon? Is there anything that you can concede to? If you see these words, it is true that certainly, admittedly, of course, obviously, sure, granted, although, even though, while, even if. For example, if we come back over here and we look a little bit at Andre's, and we were to say something like conceding to part of the argument. So obviously, right, we can say something like that, or we can say something to the extent of sing to is in fact a children's or a cartoon movie that is designed for people. It is in fact a cartoon movie, but it is one that is designed for people of all ages, something like that. And then you're going to tell us what, in fact, is going to make it for all ages. It is designed to enter people of all ages. Does that make sense, Andre?
Yes, that makes sense.
Cool. Then what are you going to do? You are going to, so what you have done is you have conceded Sing 2 is a cartoon movie, and then you've allowed us to look at a very small refutation word, but, right? You could use something, however, on the other hand, unless, on the contrary, in addition, yet, still. Well, how will we say not more than the other or not better than the other in that way? And so what you'll want to do is allow for that. Now you are going to need your refutation evidence. And so what can we provide evidence with? There are 3 different ways that you can provide evidence in this way, and making a strategic choice about which one will be key. So I am going to stop this share. I'm going to come back into our class page, And I'm going to go back to this previously page here. I don't know if you have had the opportunity quite yet to, in fact, watch the refuting evidence here, but I'm going to take that back here and provide you with this very small video to hopefully, here for you. I can hear that better. All right, and I will play this here and mute myself.
You may remember
Excuse me, Professor. I don't think there's audio.
globally.
Oh
When a
no!
writer raises the points of objection to his or her own arguments in the context of a paper, we call it a counter-argument.
Hold on.
A counter-argument, though, differs from a refutation.
I am so.
You have to, I think you have to keep your volume on.
Let me, I thought I had volumed with the computer audio. There we go. So let me just make sure that I'm doing this correctly. Cancel. And computer audio.
You may remember arguing with your siblings
Better?
as a child about which water park or amusement park your family should visit. Perhaps you loved the Arctic plunge at the water park, and your brother preferred the Wild Demon coaster at the amusement park. If your brother presented his case for preferring the amusement park, then you probably also refuted it by presenting your case for the water park. This is only one example of how naturally an argument and the refutation of an argument fit into our lives. Let's look into these concepts more closely. Refutation is simply disproving an opposing argument. It is an important rhetorical skill because it is frequently the hinge point as to whether or not a writer or speaker successfully persuades the audience. We often see argument and refutation for a particularly controversial topic. This means that a reasonable person could easily prefer either side with valid justifications for doing so. Therefore, it is all the more difficult for a writer to persuade an audience to his or her perspective because the audience usually has their own pre-established beliefs and preferences. However, when a writer takes the initiative to face the very best arguments head on and is able to first acknowledge their validity and then refute or disprove them, it is all the more persuasive. The writer then builds major credibility points with the audience because this demonstrates to the readers that the writer thought about the issue globally. When a writer raises the points of objection to his or her own arguments in the context of a paper, we call it a counter-argument. A counter-argument, though, differs from a refutation. When a writer presents a counter-argument, it acknowledges the opposing perspective's viewpoints or evidence for taking a given position. A refutation, on the other hand, takes this a step further by actually presenting evidence to disprove the opposing arguments. If a writer happens to agree with certain aspects of the opposing argument, then he or she can make a concession, which would mean to admit that an opposing view is correct. Writers and speakers will use concessions sparingly, though, because it can very easily undermine their own argument. As we've established, a refutation is disproving an argument, and there are quite a few means by which a writer can accomplish this successfully. First, refutation through evidence. An argument stands on legs of evidence. If there is no support or clear justifications for an argument, it cannot be sound or valid.
So this, everybody, really quickly, is going to be your different types of evidence, right? So the first time is what we're talking is like the refutation through evidence, and then there's going to be like a refutation through logic. So there's going to be these different ways that you can start to reason and provide evidence or provide reasoning as to why you in fact are correct or why your idea is not. So they'll talk to you about that, but I just want you to know that after you've made your claim and after you've given that concession and that new claim about what you believe and how in fact it, for example, is made for individuals of all ages to enjoy and be entertained, then what type of refutation will be best? I'm going to go ahead and push play.
Legs of evidence. If there is no support or clear justifications for an argument, it cannot be sound or valid. A writer can refute an opposing argument by successfully countering it through evidence, whether it's evidence that conclusively disproves it by its findings or because it's more recent or credible evidence. One popular debate right now centers on the existence of global warming. If a proponent for the existence of global warming cited an article about tsunamis from 2005, the opponent could come back with a more recent article, say from 2010, demonstrating scientific evidence that disproved the correlation between tsunamis and global warming. This would be an instance of refutation through evidence. Second, refutation through logic. Refutation through logic is perhaps the strongest and most persuasive form, because it essentially deconstructs the opponent's argument and proves it to be a logical fallacy. This can be difficult to do successfully because most skilled writers and rhetoricians will have already examined the validity of their arguments before presenting them. However, it is possible, so let's check out an example of this. One common logical fallacy is to assume causation when there is only correlation. Causation would mean that an event caused another event to happen, while correlation only links two events together, but doesn't claim that one event caused the other. So if I were to argue that enforcing all students to wear uniforms causes a suppression of individual expression, my opponent could respond that while there may be a correlation between uniforms and suppressed individuality, it is not a given, and therefore not a direct cause and effect relationship. In other words, there may be other variables to take into account before I can assume that uniforms cause this effect. Third, refutation through minimization. Refutation through minimization occurs when a writer shows that one of the best opposing arguments is not as central to the issue as the opposition thought. The writer might show the argument as something that is peripheral and not as eminent to the topic as his or her argument. An example of this would be if I were arguing that all freshman students across campus universities nationwide should participate in a health program to decrease the chances of gaining the extra weight of the freshman 15. If my opposition argued that the freshman 15 does not occur as frequently now because more students are non-traditional students and living at home, I might then argue that this is inconsequential considering our obesity problem in the United States. Surely any freshman would benefit from a health program whether he or she was living on campus or not. Refutation is simply disproving an opposing argument. This is different than counter-argument, which is when a writer raises the points of objection to his or her own arguments. If a writer happens to agree with certain aspects of the opposing argument, then he or she can make a concession, which would mean to admit that an opposing view is correct. Three primary types of refutation include refutation through evidence, refutation through logic, and refutation through minimization.
All right. So hopefully that made a little bit more sense to you. Any questions in terms of what you just saw? Any questions in terms of like language or the terms that were used? Anything there? So what we have here is that if we go back, Andre's made a claim, right? Sing 2, sure, is in fact a cartoon movie, because that is a part of the truth up here. You know, that's something that you can adjust to. But it's designed to entertain people of all ages. So what we've created here is, in fact, something that you are going to maybe prove them to not be true. So what type of refutation do you think you could use here? Do you think it would be like evidence to prove wrong or right? Do you think it's a logic, or do you think it's minimization? Which one do you think would be most effective? Because is this claim illogical in terms of a fallacy? No. So I would say it's not a logical evidence. And are we going to minimize the effect of it? No, it's not like, oh, well, it's only impacting a couple people, or it's not that big of a deal, or it doesn't have that much of an impact. Instead, I would say it's an evidence. Does that make sense to you, Andre?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, okay. So what would you say here in general? Anything like, what are some ideas that you have as to why, in fact, how can you prove that true?
Wait,
What I would do is I would go, what?
mhm. Yeah,
Hold on.
wait, sorry. What were you saying?
I'm just asking how you would argue it. You already know that, like, Andre, I'm not going to watch Sing 2. It's a kid's movie. What would you say back to me?
I could say I watched it by myself and enjoyed it.
Okay. That's not telling me that it's like, but it's made for children. So like, what's the argument? How can you argue against that? I made the argument, it's not made for children. It's designed to entertain and engage people of all ages.
Right.
Explain in your own words.
You can pull up a review from a reliable critic.
There you go. Give evidence from a reliable critic that suggests the attributes of the film that are made for all persons. And that's when you say, you give our call to action. So based upon the fact that although, and it's like, it is a cartoon that platform is traditionally held traditionally for children. And then you can make your claim, you know, something like it's more than, or it's better than, it's going to give you like this bigger idea, blah, 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 blah. That is why there is not an excuse to not see this film. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense.
So, for example, oh, so Natalie, you had a question, right?
You're yelling at
No,
everyone,
I
you're
was
yelling
just
at
gonna
me,
say,
you're yelling at
I was gonna say, couldn't you argue for that last point that was made? That since the movie is based on like a singing show, it's aimed towards adults because there are singing shows like American Idol for adults. So it would appeal to both children and adults at the same time.
Totally. So like if even that's what I was saying here in this engagement place, entertains and engage, you could say like, yes, it's based on a singing and a talent competition, which is typically, you know, made for individuals who are older. I think that like there's a lot of, content or the storylines that are covered, resilience. It's like all these things that it doesn't matter what age you are, those are great lessons to get with everything. It has adventure, it has all the same elements as any other like film. It's just done in a different genre. So absolutely, Natalie, excellent job. Excellent job. Did you like Sing 2, Natalie?
I haven't seen the second one, but I watched the first one with my sister and my brother.
Oh my gosh, go get your sister and brother right now. Andre, I can just already tell you the heavy sell. And go watch this movie. You will absolutely love it.
Yeah.
We just watched it again. My daughter watched it also with all of her friends for her birthday party. Like, it's so fun and it so feels good. And it has a great soundtrack. There's so many good reasons. So does anybody else want me to work on one with them or with theirs? The one that I typically will do that's very easy. So if I was to say to persuade my audience to not drink and drive, let's just say that was my proposition, because we've heard this argument before and we know how to argue it because we've been told it so many times. So to persuade my audience not to drink and drive, I would have a transition and it would say, now let's look at some of the reasons why people still drink and drive. There are 3 reasons I will address today. What's one reason that people give for drinking and driving? If you're out at a bar with friends or you're somewhere with friends and somebody's been drinking and you say, oh my gosh, don't drive, their answer is what?
That they don't feel drunk?
Oh yeah, they're fine. Right, Andre?
Yeah.
Absolutely, because they are fine. Amazing. How many times have we heard, I'm fine, I'm fine. I have a heavy tolerance. I have a high body weight. I had a huge meal. I'm fine. I only had 2 drinks.
Way too many.
Can you concede to them at any point? Of course, we don't want to give anybody credit for drinking and driving, but think about it logically. Why don't you like feel drunk, or why do you feel fine when you're drinking? You probably feel what?
You feel like pretty confident?
Yeah, you feel happy and confident and you're feeling alive and awake and all of those things, right? So it's like, yeah, sure, you may not feel drunk because the alcohol is, creating euphoric feelings of joy in your body. But the reality is, it doesn't matter how you feel. What's the reality, Andre?
You are drunk.
It doesn't matter how you feel, because what is the measurement? If a police officer pulls me over and says, they're like, have you been drinking? And I'm like, yeah, but I'm fine. What are they going to do?
What's it? They measure how drunk you are. So I forget what it's called.
Because yes, science is not going to lie in something there, right? Because science and biology are going to show differently, right? And so what can we do here to so what kind of evidence is this? What type of evidence do we want to use here? Maybe there's no fallacy here per se. Do we want to, I'm more than likely just going to prove them wrong with evidence, right? And how I'm going to do that is like through this way. No matter how reality, no matter how you feel, because science and biology are going to show differently. So that's going to be my counter argument, right? So here's my concession, here's my refutation, and then here's the argument. Does that make sense to everyone? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide you with evidence that's going to show differently. So what do? I pull out like that alcohol, that blood alcohol level chart that you get when you get your driver's license or when you do anything or when they're talking about drinking and driving. And you say, if your body weight is this much, it does not matter how like heavy you are, how many, whatever you are, if you drink this many spirits, you will in fact show and display this level of drunk. And so therefore, it doesn't matter how great you feel, you will always blow a certain number regardless of your own disposition. So no matter if you think you feel fine, there is nothing fine about drinking and driving, taking the risk of other people's lives in yours because you feel fine. Remember that your body is going to tell differently. So next time, don't drink and drive instead, right? And so that's how you can build in that counter argument. Does that make sense to y'all?
Yeah, sorry, my internet cut out for a bit.
Oh, no, that's okay. As long as that's, there's the blood alcohol level of evidence of biology and, something like that. So if you're thinking like one of the, anybody else want me to do their example before we, I go into, are you seeing that this one looks much easier than the others or than the first one? So your idea is to come up with your claim. Remember, that's going to be your A, B's, and your C's if you have a C. Then do you need to give us any type of reasoning or explanation to your opposers, right? Our oppositions. Position. There we go. And evidence or explanation of your opposer's position. Then if you don't need to define or describe or provide evidence for something like that, because again, oftentimes it's illogical, you will then concede to one that you are acknowledging that you hear them. I hear what you are saying. I understand that this is probably one of those things. If it's outdated, you can do something like, although that was true in the 1990s, in 2020, that is no longer representative today, right? And so then you'll show us how that law has changed. Or although that was once a popular belief, over time and through lots of scientific testing, we have proved that claim to in fact be false. Let me show you and provide you with that evidence, right? So how do you want to concede? We'll give them a little bit, concede, and then we will refute. So this will be the words, but, although, right? So what do we agree? And then you'll give the argument. What is it that you want to do? Prove them wrong, prove you right, prove them illogical, prove that oh, this is not a big issue to worry about. Something like that will minimize that issue. Now, the minimization also will come in when we start to talk about something about money. Money and capital are predominant huge reasons as why policies and individuals disagree on particular policies, particularly within the United States, our different values, our different ideologies that exist. And so when we, oh, crumb cake, I don't remember why I wanted to talk to you about those values. Oh, so capital, the idea of money. If it is that like, it's going to be too expensive to put this in, or it's going to be too expensive, that's some of the reasons as why people don't want to do that, or they think it's going to take money away, or they think it's going to cost money, or it's going to do something like that. You should weigh that and minimize it, because what they're trying, well, the idea is that somebody's trying to minimize like human life, human capacity, the betterment of humanity over, in fact, the monies. So for example, if we're saying something like to provide more psychiatric care to college students, to provide more free psychiatric care to college students, one of the arguments is going to be that that's going to cost money to put into play. But the logic is that if your university or your college has their students and their well-being and success at the foremost of their like mission statement, a la Santa Monica College, then why are they not putting that in? That's one logical way to look at it. But also we can then start to balance that. Is the money going to pay out and assist? And in the long run, it will be better because these individuals will have had the help, and therefore it won't be taking the money from over here. And so that idea of like, if we do give people, you know, health care, that eventually this whole idea like that if we provide people with health care, it will take less of our resources than it will more, whereby individuals think like, oh, I'm going to have to pay so many taxes and then all my resources aren't going to be there. So this minimizing idea is that money is always going to be something, and they're always going to make money so important, but what are we losing at the expense of money? And that's like humanity or health or assistance for particular demographics, etc. So you want to make sure that you are doing one of those. Then you'll provide us evidence of your above refutation, or whatever, oh, sorry, of your above, counter argument. The counter argument, remember, is but the reality is you don't know, because science is going to show you differently, right? That's the counter argument that I'm saying. I'm saying, no, you're not fine. Science is going to show you differently. And then here is that evidence that proves that true. And then I will draw to a call to action, which says that is why your idea is not valid. And instead, you must agree with my policy. Any other questions about how this works or the steps that you need to go through and ask yourself? Remember that on your opposing viewpoints, or if you were to look on and search and Google your counter arguments, I'm more than sure like they would be there. For example, I don't even know if this is something, but why people don't, what are we saying? A lot. Great. So here's somebody who said it was horrible and they hated it. Let's find out what those reasons are, right? we'll see what the things, like what people say. So I wasn't expecting so much, but after watching, oh, just as good as the first, da, 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 streaming in theater. So we can look to some of these reasons as to what people give, and then what you can use is that as your platform. Because it doesn't contain any sex, violence, bad words, because it's filled with adorable anamorphic animals. Totally true. That's a really cute way to say it on the Roger Ebert. So you can always look up these reasons, right? Jordan, why people don't travel for personal growth. It's like, will traveling hinder your personal growth? I bet it wouldn't. So then you can counter argue that, constantly being individual, right? And you can do that. What are the reasons that people give? And then counter argue it with what they do know. So those may be some ways for you to go back. The last thing, oh wait, 1 second. I wanted you to see what was that? Download, oh, here. So last thing I wanted to show you here was on your page, on this example where you have it. If we read through this, the thing is to persuade my audience that Sean High School should have an open campus policy for those maintaining a 3.2 GPA and above. What's an open campus policy? It means you can go off campus like right whenever you want. And that means that you can like leave and come and go during open periods or during lunch and the such. So there are 4 steps, like when creating the counter argument. So what I've said here is like the first reason that an open campus policy doesn't exist is that school administration thinks that an open campus would be temptation for students to cut class and act irresponsibly. Then we create our concession and we say something like, for example, although cutting classes and acting irresponsibly may be true for some, then here comes my rebuttal. Consider the reality that, here's my argument, if a student wants to find a way to cut class or act irresponsibly, they will do so regardless if that policy exists. An open campus policy is not going to change this type of student's behavior. So this type of evidence is more of the minimization, right? Like we were talking about with that last one, is that although that may be what you think is going to happen, more than likely that's not going to happen. Do we have evidence of that? Can we prove that their claim is false or our policy is better, or that this, in fact, if a student wants a way to cut class or act irresponsibly, they will do so? How are we going to prove that? An example. In a high school with similar demographics to Sean called Scotch Plains, Principal Ryan Adams reported that 97% of students maintained their honor roll status after 3 years of open campus. And only 2% of students overall received disciplinary action for breaking the open campus rules. Now I'm going to explain what that evidence means, this warrant, right? Over 3 years, a small number of students breaking the open campus policy system had no bearing on student behavior, and thus we can assume that what is true in the case of our fellow friends at Scotch Plains will be true for our distinguished scholars as well. And let's be honest, students who earn the privilege of an open campus would be unlikely to jeopardize that privilege. An honor student would hardly run the risk of lowering their 3.5 GPA by cutting class. So let's give them a chance and allow for that open campus policy. Does this make sense to y'all? So what I said is, how will that look when you break it down? It will look like this very quickly. And then you repeat the above as needed. I've gone on and given you a second example, repeated it, and showed you what that will look like in turn. So what I have done here is provided you with these pieces of evidence. And one very important piece of evidence, if we see here, all right, what we did here in a high school with a similar demographic. Some of you, but I don't think really anybody right here, may have a policy that in fact has yet to be implemented, maybe even in California or maybe somewhere local, but it has been implemented elsewhere. In this case, you can do what we call analogical reasoning. And that's what happened here, is where we are comparing two similar things. We saw this happen in policy and debate when marijuana was becoming legalized. Why? Because with the legalization of marijuana, it only happened in certain states to begin with. And so when California was considering this on the ballot, the evidence that they provided was from places like Colorado and Washington. It wouldn't work to establish a comparison with something in Amsterdam or in Germany. Why? Why would we not compare like an overseas policy or value? Their system, the people, and the way that their ideology are around alcohol and drugs is exponentially different. The United States was born in prohibition and out of like Puritanism. And so our idea of alcohol and drug consumption is much more ideologically bound to the ideals of good and bad, right? And so thus, the way that just because our policy works there doesn't mean that it's always going to work here based upon the same people. So when you are making those comparisons, they should be similar. For example, I had a student at LMU who wanted to persuade the audience to put in a shuttle bus around campus because they only had 10 minutes to get to classes. And so because they hadn't done this before, but USC, for example, does, they used USC as a comparison to how it assisted students in safety and how it assisted them in academic success, and showed those two comparisons to show that what's good in this case may be good in this case as well. So for each of you on your week, this week, you do have your main point. Oh, wait, that's main point number, sorry, everybody, not that main point number 1. Let's go to your main point number 2 assignment, which is, sorry, in this week's module. So let me just skip over here. Two. There we go. So you're going to simply submit the same outline that you've been working on with the first main point, and you can submit that same thing to us so that the heading and the header is all there, the general purpose, specific purpose thesis. Use proper indentation, make sure that you are symbolizing correctly, write in full sentences, and make sure that you're using that logical 4-part to 5-part structure. Then use at least one outside source that correctly develops or supports that initial claim, beginning that argument. Be sure to single space your sentences and double space in between the symbols, and either submit a shareable or editable Google Doc or a Word doc. So try not to make this into a PDF if you can.